Seeing none. Reports, we have Superintendent Armstrong here today to provide us with an update on budget survey and public consultation, as well as the GSN.
Thank you through you, Madam Chair. We have two reports that we are providing today that are in the board package. The first one is a report on the 2023 budget survey and public consultation. Administration has prepared the report for trustees to share the results of the consultation process. The consultation consisted of the budget survey, which was made available to the members of the public for a 5-week period. There was a YouTube video that was on the board's website and through the board's YouTube channel that explained the board's budgeting process and also explained the Ministry of Education funding process. There were 2 public budget consultation meetings that were offered to the public at the board meetings of April 4th and April 18th. And as well, members of the finance staff met with GECPIC and the Special Education Advisory Committee as well to go over the budget process, The board report also provides the results of the public consultation. We've tried to be very transparent in sharing the comments that were provided by the budget survey. It's important to note that the opinions or the comments that are included in the report are provided by individual members of the school community. Administration will carefully consider the public input as it finalizes the budget. The budget will support inclusion, diversity, and equity of all of our students and staff. I would also like to point out that there are several comments in the survey which do make reference to wages and benefits of certain employee groups. I appreciate the comments. I think we all appreciate the comments. It is important to note, though, that matters with respect to wages and benefits are negotiated with the province directly and not individual school boards. In terms of the second report that we're providing, it is an update on the GSN. On April 17th, the ministry released the 2023-24 GSN and the related technical paper, together with tabling legislation for Bill 98, which is the Better Schools and Students Outcomes Act. Administration has prepared a report that summarizes the key changes to the GSN, and we've also provided a summary of GSN funding from a provincial perspective. Also included in this report is certain board-specific funding regarding capital funding, announced partnerships and priorities fundings, as well as a provincial projection of the board's funding. We are in the process of updating our EFIS forms, which is the ministry system that we input our data into. And this will generate our final GSN funding for 2023-24 based on our projected enrollment. And we will be bringing forward updates to the board on our next Operations and Finance Committee meeting, and then the final budget on June the 20th. I got the date right. Thank you. Happy to take questions.
Thank you. Any questions on K1? Yes, Trustee Burgess. Either one. Budget survey. Or GSN. Yeah.
I will have more questions, but just over the weekend we had our provincial organizations staff give us their interpretation of the GSN, so we didn't have the Greater Essex, sharp focus. But in all my years of listening to the education finance person at OPSPA, they were the most concerned and the most dire. These are very common, very analytical, and very, I heard some real concern. So even from a cursory look at, like the short report you gave or whatever, I asked at the last meeting whether there was a feeling that there was more tension around it. What I heard was there was an announcement of an increase, but it was really a repackaging of some funds and that were underspent. So, like many things that we get announcements of, if it comes late in the year, if it comes and it doesn't fit your exact need, you're given something and it's underspent, it's clawed back. to the province, and then it's kind of renamed and trotted out again. And so the increases that we think we're getting may not actually materialize as increases, and in fact, they might be, from an inflationary point of view, less. So my question, my concerns are, is that an accurate reflection? I think all of us were kind of shocked around the table that we're all going to be, I got the quote here, heavily impacted, and that our buying power is heavily impacted.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. We've done some preliminary work in EFIS, and I can share some information with you, just knowing that this is still very preliminary. This budget is going to be extremely challenging to pass a balanced budget. And there's a number of reasons for it. The ministry increased the GSN by 2.7% for its base funding, but it's not keeping abreast of inflation. Inflation is 4.5%. When we've budgeted for our heating costs for 23-24, we expect that those are going to increase 15%. And our water costs are going to increase 5%. We took our snow tendering out to tender, and the lowest bid, we're looking at, on the same number of visits that we had last year, is an additional $2 million. The time-limited funding that was provided in 2022-23, some of it has not been renewed by the ministry. We had $5.2 million for the COVID Learning Recovery Fund, and that funding is gone. And we had $1.5 million in tutoring supports, and that funding is gone. There is a new funding model for student transportation that's been introduced in 23-24 on a very specific set of service parameters. So it's consistent throughout the province. We actually won on that one. Right now we're projecting to pick up approximately $2 million in funding, but unfortunately we also got the projection for transportation costs, and even with that $2 million, we're going to be running a $1 million deficit in transportation. There were changes to the funding methodology for Indigenous education and a realignment to, and this is not my words, to better support education priorities. This is a funding decrease to the board in that funding envelope of $1.7 million. Funding for special education has not changed substantially. And if you remember from last year, for 22-23, we had a $9 million funding deficit. We will have the same this year if we don't make any substantive changes to services. We've talked about occasional teacher costs and absenteeism. We fully expect that will, the rates will be about the same as what we're experiencing in the current year. And if you recall, at revised estimates in December, we went forward and requested a deficit budget to be approved, in part to provide an additional $3.1 million for those costs. And we would expect we're going to need that same level, which is a total of $13.1 million for those costs. We're not funded nearly to that level by the ministry. Our projected enrollment for 23-24 versus 22-23, when we compare the original budget from last year to the projected budget for this year, our student enrollment is going to be up 396 students. However, when we compare our projected enrollment to what we put in at our revised estimates in December, it's actually a decrease of 598 students. So we'll be triggering the declining enrollment grant, and we should get approximately $960,000 for that. There are other funding increases that we are getting, but that's simply just adjustments by the ministry for the salary and benefits benchmark, and that's determined by the ministry. Our capital funding for school condition improvement funding is a $4 million decrease than what we got last year. Our school renewal funding of about 6.5 million remains unchanged. On top of that, the ministry has imposed time limits for the use of that funding. Sometimes there's challenges in spending that money because it's hard to get a skilled trade, it's hard to tender the work for those reasons. And so we were in the past able to defer that revenue and spend it in subsequent years. But now there are time limits in terms of when that money has to be spent or the government will claw that back. So that's the positive news that I have right now. We're still working on it. It's very preliminary. I'm not trying to alarm people, but I'm trying to be, quite frankly, realistic that this is going to be very difficult and challenging, and there's going to have to be difficult decisions that are made in order to present a balanced budget, which we need to really contemplate that, because you can't keep spending more than what you're receiving.
Madam Chair, I have a supplemental, a specific one that was in my notes, and it's about wages and benefits, but it wasn't in camera. It's something that is in the budget, and it's about the 2% cost update for non-staff portion, et cetera, 2% inflationary increase, blah, blah, blah. But it's the EI and CPP. And we have to help offset the significant, benefit increase and the additional pension responsibilities that we're obligated to. So when EI and CPP contributions and whatever goes up, generally money kind of flows to cover those costs, because those are federal statutory things that happen, that have an impact, and yet the provincial government didn't have the money to flow to cover something that the feds are saying, well, no, you have to, it has to be contributed more. What bottom line? I heard TDSB, $28.8 million of CPP and $1.1 million of EI. What is it to us for our contributions for CPP and EI that we don't have a choice? We got to pay that.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, I can't answer that question yet.
Okay.
It's tricky. I'm surprised they were able to calculate it because of the way the benchmarks are working in the GSN. It's hard sometimes to pull out all the benefit components, but you are correct. We are not funded for any of the increases that happen in those federal statutory deductions to the level from the provincial government. So I'll have to get back to you on that.
To that end, since it's a federal thing, federal money, I'm going to say, bailed us out of the ventilation infrastructure stuff. It was money that flowed to the province to help us with capital costs to upgrade, our ventilation, et cetera. When something federal comes like that, can we not maybe, send some information, like a letter or something or other, to our MPs to say that's fine. We understand the funding of employment insurance, fund, NCPP needs more in order for it to be sustainable, fine. But the money has to flow. So if the province is going to do it, somebody has to. Like we can't keep taking the hit for something has nothing to do with kids.
Trustee Hatfield.
Thank you. Just on that, I think at a previous board meeting, I think I brought up that topic about how, because it was discussed in the chair's meeting with the minister, about how we have to pay these federal costs, but we don't get covered for them, and so we already start out in a deficit. Every single board in Ontario starts out their budget in a deficit, and that's just one of the big factors, because we don't get funded to whatever that percentage is that you have to pay for CPP and EI and whatever else for the mandatory deductions. So it is a problem, and it impacts us all. And there's nobody saying anything on the horizon about fixing it, which is problematic as well. So it's pretty hard to balance the budget when you're already starting in the hole. We know we're starting in the hole because of that. We know we're starting in the hole because of transportation costs, because of special education, because of a lot of things. We're already starting in a deficit when we try to create our balanced budget.
Trustee Hatfield, do you have another question?
I just wanted to make a comment, if I could, because I know that this board, for many years, has tried different initiatives to encourage input from the community on our budget, and I just wanted to pay note to the fact that we did advertise 2 public budget meetings to encourage input from the community. And at both meetings, we didn't have anyone come to address the budget. And then, so the other thing I wanted to comment on was that this survey that we've used is a new tool that's been used by the board only 3 times. And this particular time, we increased the participation by 50% from the last time we used the survey, according to what I'm reading here. So I think that we're making some progress as opposed to not getting public input. But if anybody else has any suggestions on what else we might try, because, you know, we've tried many different things over the years. It's too bad that the public consultation meetings don't get more interest, but I think we'll keep trying. Yeah.
Thank you, Trustee Hatfield. Trustee Chin?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the information about the budget consultation survey. And I noticed on page 10 on the form, and as for the ranking top budget priorities, actually reading and writing skills, literacy and development has 108 vote as priority, the number 1 priority. But and mental health and well-being staff is 94. So reading and writing skills actually has a lot of concerns from parents as number 1, but it's kind of not emphasized here because it's excluded from the first top 3 priorities. So that's my concern, that because this is very important for changing our priority, and the survey did reflect that it was ignored. And also I have another observation is that we have respondents group, and most of the group is staff members, and 895, and parents and guardians 346. And if we combined all the comments together, I think it's not easy for us to get really, opinions from parents and from different groups. So I would like to suggest we have different group analysis. For parents and guardians, we have different separate group. And what's the priority? Number 1, number 2, number 3. I believe that the knowledge, reading and writing skills and math learning will be on the top 3. If we did that, but in this way we just mixed it up and didn't really have any focus. And also, I just got a parents' question regarding it said the survey should ask if parents want DEI in schools, diversity, equity and inclusiveness in schools, especially given the feedback to educate, not indoctrinate, and cut and divert DEI expenses to core curriculum, and this kind of the issue. If we really want to get the opinion from the parents, we should ask a question directly. Because we got a lot of complaints regarding that, there is no reason for us to get away from those focus questions. It doesn't matter if we just ask their opinion. If they support EDI, no problem. And if they have complaint regarding that, we can check if there is any gap in our rules or priorities. So I think that makes sense. And parents also ask who really promote EDI so much in our board. So I hope you can answer to the parents. Thank you.
Thank you. Superintendent Armstrong, do you have?
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. Okay, that was a lot. So I may not answer all of this. The budget was promoted through social media, through the board's website, through EDSB, through a news release. It was communicated at board meetings, and there was an equal opportunity for staff, parents, students, community members to all participate in the survey. Participating was a choice. So if there were not enough parent responses relative to staff responses, those were choices that people had to engage in the survey or not. When we do the survey, we're trying to gather information about a number of areas to help inform the decisions for the budget. I wouldn't think we would ever ask a question about whether to include or exclude any one single item. There were questions and opportunities in the open-ended questions at the end of the survey for people to communicate their concerns about anything with respect to the budget in terms of providing additional input. And the comments on too much or too little diversity, equity, inclusion are reflected. We were very transparent. We provided all of the comments. We didn't eliminate anything unless it named a staff member specifically. We removed those. And there isn't a lot of information in those comments specifically on that one particular topic. And when we do this budget, we will consider all of the input. And we certainly acknowledge, and I know through Superintendent Howitt's presentation today, reading, math, and literacy is very fundamental work to the board. And while we ranked what we felt were the most common responses, it doesn't mean that those are the only things that we will consider when we do this budget. We will consider all of the input that's been provided, relative as well to the funding we receive from the ministry and all the other initiatives of the board.
Trustee Burgess, do you have a question?
I have a question on the consultation, not on the budget. And questions as far as numbers of questions asked or for clarification, you should be able to get the information. So there isn't a number to those. But anyway, I'm wondering if we can disaggregate the way we collected the data. Can we disaggregate it in any way to see what the responses were from parents, guardians, community versus the comments that were collected from staff? Knowing, of course, that staff, by and large, are also parents and guardians. So you don't know what hat they had on when they were identifying as staff and being fully informed in the classroom and outside the classroom, having students in their household. So, and who were just community members who have no, kids in the system, like 70% of public education supporters. So can we disaggregate that? Did we attempt to? Would it show maybe something that would inform professional development, for example, for staff, where they're saying these are the areas that we really need more support? Could it also put a spotlight on how we can best support parents and guardians who want some adult tutoring and help in order to help their kids achieve whatever? Have we tried that? And was GECPIC part of this? Because I want to know if our official voice of the parents and guardians had a play in this in promoting.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. Did we attempt? No. Is the data available? Because everyone was answering anonymously. I would have to follow up to see whether we could disaggregate it, knowing though you'll never be able to pull any one piece out on its own, because a staff member could be a parent, a community member, right? So that would be challenging. We could certainly consider it for future years. In terms of GECPIC, I'll turn that over to Superintendent Hillman.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. We were pleased to have a presentation at GECPIC in detail. To the point of 40 minutes in, Superintendent Armstrong giving me the look like, oh my goodness, we're okay. It was a very interested group. In addition to that, sharing of the questions themselves and the nature of that, we followed up with GECPIC at our following meeting with the direct link if there was anyone who still wanted to put additional input forward that they could.
First, Trustee Sipgar.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. I would like to just take a minute to say I think that the number of respondents is actually exceptional. If most people have ever tried to do a survey or know what's, the number to be statistically significant, this, as the size of our district, it's very high. And that was actually going to be my question, was similarly, did we capture any of that demographic data, and could we see if it is statistically significant? And is that maybe something that we can do moving forward? That's not the real question, but I just wanted to say that, as a researcher, I was like, oh, this is actually pretty good. So with that being said, I did want to ask about the top priority, which were actually the top two priorities, which was mental health and well-being for staff and students. And knowing that so much of our budget is already predetermined, 80% goes to the wages of our staff. And then, we have all these other envelopes, so to speak, in terms of transportation, things that we really can't, snow removal, things that we can't really negotiate on. I wondered within that, more limited amount of our budget that we are able to shift around, do you or do others in administration have any ideas of how that priority can be reflected in our schools or through the budget specifically? Or is that something that is still being thought about, especially with the new funding announcement from the ministry around mental health specifically? New funding.
I would suggest we're still examining that. I mean, we do have social workers that are available in our schools, and we do have we've had Ms. Nolan present to our board, who is our mental health and wellness teacher, who's been going to schools and supporting that. I don't know if any of my colleagues have anything further to add, but we're still contemplating all of those decisions in the budget. But we do acknowledge the significance and importance of those two initiatives.
Just as a quick supplemental, not to put Superintendent Housen on the spot, but I know that this past week at a conference we had one of our own staff, a wellness officer, present some of the work that they were doing. That was kind of what I was getting at, but I didn't ask you this question in advance. But I'm just curious if those programs are coming out of those priorities are kind of being reflected in that way. It was an excellent presentation, and I just think there is a lot of good work happening. So maybe as we get closer to the budget, we can hear a little bit more about that, especially as it relates to what was the top really two priorities for staff and families.
Trustee Chin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to mention about the previous question regarding separate the groups. I think it's very simple because we have several hundred, respondents for each group, and just send a query questions, and from the database is very easily to get the result. So that's my suggestion. Actually, I'm looking forward to see the result. Thank you.
Thank you.